Entitled Aunt Tried to Kill Our Dog. Back in September 2008, my grandmother had a heart attack and had to be hospitalized. I had recently moved out of my parental home. My stepbrother had moved out just a year earlier. When my dad and stepmom were taking turns staying with her in the hospital, my parental aunt would just drop in for a few minutes, make small talk, and leave. She suggested that my dog should kill our dog, Dennis. The reason she gave for this kick-in-the-ass-worthy advice was that Dennis was a black dog, and black dogs bring bad luck. Her mother was obviously in the hospital because of the dog, and certainly not because, in spite of being diabetic and having a high cholesterol, she refused to stop stuffing her face with fried junk. Just a few days later, grandmother died. Cue insane wailing and crying from my aunt, while going on and on about how she wouldn't have lost her mother if only that damn dog had been put down. You may wonder why she was so obsessed with killing Dennis. It's because Dennis had never liked her or her husband and son. He would growl at them when they came near him. He was a smart dog, and I guess he could sense what bad people they were. Dennis was a mongrel, 24 inches at the withers and weighed around 90 pounds. So of course, when he growled, he appeared intimidating. She was also really jealous of him, and always commented on how we were wasting money by feeding and caring for him well. Grandmother's illness and subsequent death gave Crazy Aunt an opportunity to get revenge. I began to fear for Dennis as soon as I heard what that idiot had said. Since my stepbrother couldn't make it, I decided to take time off work and go to my dad's place. This was mostly to watch over Dennis and make sure Aunt and her family didn't get a chance to harm him. My dad made arrangements for the funeral, talked to the priest, etc., while stepmom and I cooked and got the house ready. My aunt was there too, but mostly milking the occasion for attention and being a crying, wailing basket case. She was still going on about how the dog had brought bad luck. However, when my stepmom told me to cook Dennis's chicken stew for him while she took a bath and got dressed, Aunt began to act real funny. She would hang around the kitchen and near the food, on the pretense of making small talk with me. I just gave her monosyllabic responses, hoping she would go away. Just as I got the stew off the burner, I heard my dad walk in through the front door. He called out to me. I began walking towards the front gate in a hurry. However, as I reached the door, I was overcome with a horrible feeling. In my haste, I had left Crazy Aunt alone with Dennis's food. I ran back to the kitchen, with my dad asking me what the hell was wrong. I entered the kitchen to find that monumental big head pouring some sort of white substance into Dennis's chicken stew. My father took it from my aunt's hands and instantly identified it as a kind of rat poison. I watched that substance get dissolved into the stew and disappear, leaving no trace of foul play. If Aunt hadn't gotten caught, we would surely have lost our beloved family member. Aunt just stood there with a deer-in-headlights look on her face. I can't remember the last time I'd seen my dad so angry. He told her she was to attend grandmother's funeral, and then never show him her face again, while I somehow overcame the urge to throttle her. My stepmom too had joined us, and was told what happened. Aunt somehow stammered that she was doing what was right for the family, repeating the nonsense about black dogs bringing bad luck. Of course, no one was having it. My uncle arrived shortly afterwards, and in spite of being a grade-A jerk himself, he did have the decency to look ashamed when he was told what his wife had tried to pull. My dad didn't speak to them for over 2 years. He only contacted them again when he found out that they were in a dire state financially. As for Dennis, the good boy lived a long and healthy life. He passed away last year at the age of 14, surrounded by those who truly loved him. I feel for you and your family. I can't believe that your aunt tried to poison your dog. What a deluded monster. I hope she comes to her senses. Her reasoning behind everything is completely delusional. Your dad is a great person for reaching out to them when hearing they are in a bad situation, even after what she tried to do. I'm just really glad your senses kicked in at the perfect time, as like you said, you had no way of knowing she had poisoned the stew if you was just a minute later. Entitled kid attacks my sister's service dog because entitled mother doesn't think she needs it. This incident happened a few months ago. My sister, Amy, 17, was physically and sexually abused by my family. I took custody of both her and my other sister, Liza, 8, who was being groomed into thinking that behavior would be normal when it started for her. Liza is fine now and adjusted to living with me properly, while Amy has a long list of physically and mental impairments that affect her daily. Because of this, I got her a service dog, a German Shepherd crossbred named Lickety Split. She is a fun bunny-shaped mark that looks like an ice cream cone on her head, and her trainers named her after one of the really old My Little Ponies. Now, Amy adores her dog. We did a few months' work with the trainer to get Lickety Split tailored towards Amy's needs, such as strangers needed to respect Amy's personal space bubble. Something I hear from people is how they struggle not to pet service dogs because they need to let them know they're a good dog. But trust me, their people let them know. Lickety gets groomed daily by Amy, and they never go out without a pocket full of treats. I have 3 different stories of entitled parents and kids thinking they deserve Amy's dog more than her, and the first happened less than a month after we got Lickety Split. We were down at a local park that allowed off-leash dogs, letting our dog have a run around, and she didn't have her vest on as this was playtime for her, but I had it with me just in case she needed to go into service mode for my sister, which wasn't uncommon. I make an effort to get down to the park with Amy and Liza daily, because otherwise Amy would just hide away in her blankets any chance she got, and it was good for her to be out in public and getting the fresh air. We were playing fetch with Lickety Split, taking turns throwing the ball for our happy dog. Amy starts getting a bit antsy about an hour into our normally 2-hour-long walk, which happens. There isn't always a reason. She just gets fidgety and spooks easily, and I'd learnt to recognize when she's distressed ages ago. So we called Lickety Split back, and I help her into her vest, as when she's not wearing it, kids often come up to pat and join in the play. But when Amy gets anxious, it's better to have Lickety Split have her attention on Amy. A young child comes up with her mom, who had one of those obviously fake smiles on her face. She didn't have the typical, "Can I speak to the manager" haircut, but one of those, "I feel like I'm better than you, and we'll make sure you know it" like haircuts. She will be our Karen, and her daughter will be dubbed Little Susie. Karen asked us why we stopped playing, telling us her kid was enjoying watching us play and would like to join in. I calmly let her know, "I'm sorry, miss. Our dog is an emotional support dog, and she needs to look after my sister right now. I'm not sure why you said your child could play with her dog. I most certainly wouldn't tell my girl it was okay for them to play with things." As I explained this, I moved to stand between her and Amy, who is sitting on the ground with her attention on her dog and trying to ground herself. I am very protective over both my sisters, so I leave no room for her to get near Amy, who is now on the ground, breathing heavily, while Lickety Split does her job, while telling Liza to sit with her big sister and help her if she needs, as sometimes Amy needs help to calm down. Karen then comes out with some nonsense, claiming that that's not a real thing, and because my sister isn't blind, she doesn't need a dog working for her. I did my best to stay calm, and explain that guide dogs aren't the only type of service dog, and that my sister had her dog to help with anxiety and other mental health issues. She responds to this with, "Dogs shouldn't be made to work for people. It's wrong that you've enslaved that poor animal." This infuriated me, and I told her that our dog isn't enslaved. She's simply been taught how to recognize when my sister needs help or needs to calm down, and that even I went through courses to help me learn how to best care for my sister. Our dog is treated as an extension of the family and enjoys helping my sister. Now we need to get home so I can get my sister's dinner. As I turn to my sisters, I see Susie trying to grab at Lickety Split's tail. Liza simply plops herself down at her rear with her back to little Susie and begins patting her sister's dog's back. Deciding I'd had enough, and there was no way Amy was going to calm down here, I start to pack up the girls to take them home, despite it being an hour earlier than normal. I turn around and help Amy off the ground. She's in tears and shaking at this point, and won't let go of Lickety Split, who is in her alert mode due to my sister's mood. Liza complains about having to go home early, as I clip on Lickety Split's lead and hold Amy close, letting her hold onto part of the lead while I hold the handle out of caution. As we start to walk off, little Susie leaps forward and tackles our dog. Amy screams and crouches on the ground with her hands over her head in a frantic panic, while I push the kid away. Lickety Split, who is limping and whining but still goes straight for Amy and stands over her. By now, she is quite angry and growling at Karen and Susie for scaring her person and hurting her. The child is crying at how I pushed her off the dog. All she wanted was a ride on her back. Karen then comes up to me, practically foaming at the mouth. "Karen, hand over that mutt right now, or I'm reporting you for abusing my child." I flipped here and snapped back, telling her my sisters are in my care because they were abused by their family. If she reported me for doing anything that could result in me losing them, I will sue her for slander. I added that her child hurt my sister's dog, so we're going to the vet, and asked for her details so I can send her the vet bill. As I said this, I was pointing to the nearby toilet block with a security camera on the side. Karen, a look of dumbfounded anger over her features, reluctantly gives me her number before she takes her child and dashes. But I make sure to also write down the plate number of her car before calling the police, just in case she does make the assault claim. I am very cautious when it comes down to the custody of my siblings, as I don't trust most of my family with them, and losing custody over them would kill me. We take Lickety Split to the vet, and she has only minor sprains to her hind legs and back. I make sure to send the details of the vet bill to Karen. Surprise, surprise. She refused to pay until I threatened to take her to court, as Lickety Split and all her training were not cheap. After a little back and forth, she reluctantly pays before contacting me 3 days later, saying she's going to sue me for the money back, to which I simply tell her I'll see her in court. It's been about 7 months now, and nothing. I've never understood how people can think they're entitled to other people's pets. While I didn't mind buying Lickety Split for Amy, she was a lot more expensive than regular dogs, and this Karen didn't even believe she was now specially trained. Our dog is doing fine now, and it's a massive load off me having her, as I don't feel the need to hover over Amy to make sure she's okay. But please, remember never to disturb a service dog. Their attention needs to be on their person. You're a very brave person to stand up to someone like that and take on the responsibility of your 2 younger sisters to get them out of a horrible situation. I can't believe how much you 3 have been through. It sounds horrendous, and I couldn't be happier that you managed to get out of it. Of course, the damage caused to Amy is going to be lifelong, and it was a great choice from you to get her a trained dog to help out. It sounds like you've got a good family now, and that makes me really happy for you. I hope your sisters are doing well too. People like Karen are really strange to me. How hard is it to accept no as an answer? She could have just simply gone on with her day and not caused any problems. But she had to get up in your business and push everyone's limits. The kid must have been brought up terribly if she thinks it's okay to just tackle a dog and try to ride it. In the end, karma struck her, and I'm glad you chased her up on the vet bill. And I'm sure you could have pressed charges if you wanted. But maybe it's for the best to just let it slide this time and focus on your family. EM had my homeless uncle's dog put down. Around 13 to 14 years ago, my uncle had gotten out of his second stint in jail and was determined to turn his life around when he got out. He said the day he was released was the last time things went well for him. Less than a year after his release, his girlfriend had left him. He couldn't find anyone to give him a job since he was an ex-convict, and he'd burned a lot of bridges with the people in his life. As a result, he'd lost the apartment he and his ex had been living in, and it wasn't long until he was living out of his car with the few possessions that he couldn't sell off. At that point in his life, he was bathing in a creek that he had parked near, trying to stay as clean as he could so he could try to find work, and just living day to day trying to take care of himself and stay on the straight and narrow. One day, this stray dog with no collar comes up to him as he's eating and just sits down in front of him, begging for food. After giving her a little bit of his sandwich, she just followed him around wherever he went, and so he decided to informally adopt her. He named her Roxy, got her a collar, and did his best to keep her clean and fed, to the point that he said he'd lost about 30 pounds just trying to make sure she was well fed. According to him, she was the sweetest little dog you could imagine, and was one of the few things holding him together at that point in his life. Most days, when my uncle wasn't putting in applications, he was going through trash cans in places like public parks looking for cans and bottles. There was one fairly large park that he would visit often, since he would always come away with a pretty large haul of cans and bottles. Unfortunately, not everyone there was cool with him being there. He said that most people would steer clear of him, but this one entitled mother in particular basically made it her mission in life to harass him whenever she saw him. Entitled mother would constantly come up and talk shit directly to his face, constantly threatening to call the cops if he didn't leave, make snide remarks about his appearance and living situation, saying things like, if he couldn't take care of himself, he had no business taking care of a dog. Most times, my uncle would leave as soon as he saw her, but one day, entitled mother came up and did her usual thing of berating my uncle, only this time, her little brat was with her. Her little brat was apparently amused greatly by his mom being an awful person, and ran up to Roxy, slapped her on the face, and told her to go away. According to my uncle, Roxy nipped at the little brat and bit one of his fingers, with there being very little blood, but that didn't matter, since it sent entitled mother into full-blown hysterics. The cops and animal control ended up being called, and my uncle was told that they needed to test Roxy for rabies, since my uncle admitted to her being a stray, and as a result, she would need to be euthanized. Despite my uncle's statement and several witnesses being present, the officer still ripped Roxy out of his arms, with my uncle crying and begging them not to take Roxy away, as they held him on the ground. I wish I could say there was a happy ending to the story, that the villain got defeated, and everyone lived happily ever after. But sadly, this isn't the case. My uncle said that they ended up holding him down at one of the police stations for a few days, during which time he found out Roxy didn't have rabies. To make a long story short, he ended up calling my mom, whom he hadn't been on speaking terms with for several years, and she ended up driving down and helped him get a lawyer. A little while after that, he ended up moving in with us for a while. He tried to pursue legal action several times, but he never got very far, and he sadly never really recovered from the whole experience. I feel so sorry for your uncle having to go through all of that. It sometimes does really feel like the whole world is against you. It's very evident that your uncle was serious about changing this time out of prison, but unfortunately, it isn't that easy. People look at you a different way once you are an ex-convict, and it isn't fair at all. Roxy was a blessing in his life that came during a really hard time. It's so sad to think that she was put down over something so minuscule. I love that he has made amends with your mother now, and that you guys gave him a place to stay for a while. After all, that is what family is for. Entitled dad demands a puppy. We had these entitled parents come into the shelter with their brood of kids. When I say brood, I mean like 6 or 7. I couldn't keep count, as they were running around the shelter acting like it was a playground and freaking the dogs out and pissing the staff off. Entitled mom never really said much, just kinda kept in the back on her phone. Most of the interaction here was through entitled dad, the focal point of the story. So they come in looking for a high-energy dog that is also good with kids. We ask them the basic questions, one of which is if they have other animals in the house. This is to gauge which dogs we can show them, as some dogs in our shelter will kill another dog on sight, so we have to be careful. They have no other animals at home. We show them one of our young and very high-energy dogs that loves to play with kids, but hasn't liked other dogs in the shelter. We inform them of the dog's history, as far as we know. They like the dog, and adopt him, knowing full well that he needs to be an only dog. Now, days later, we get a litter of small lab puppies turned in. As we are getting them set up in kennels, in comes entitled father, entitled mother, and the brood of kids with the dog we adopted out to them. They want to find the dog a friend. We tell them that the dog wasn't dog-friendly when he was here, and we reminded them we recommended he be an only dog. They don't care, and they want another dog, and the one they want just so happens to be one of the small lab puppies. At this point, the staff is looking at each other shocked, because we know that this puppy would die if the older dog just decided to grab it by the head and shake it. We try to tell them that the puppy is way too small, and wouldn't be able to defend itself if it was attacked. Entitled dad scoffs, and says that the older dog loves other dogs, and plays well with his neighbor's small dogs all the time. We tell entitled dad that while that may be, we cannot, in good conscience, adopt the puppy to them because of the older dog showing signs of aggression towards other dogs in the shelter. Now, at this point, entitled dad is throwing a tantrum. He's demanding the puppy, and we simply tell him no, and repeat our reasons why. It's at this point when he says he wants to surrender the older dog and adopt the puppy then. We all look at him like the jerk that he is and tell him we are not going to do that. He storms outside with entitled mother and the brood, and they were arguing in the front yard of our shelter when a young couple walked by. The guy says something to entitled dad and points at the dog, and the dad says something back, and the guy shakes his head and walks into our front office and tells us that entitled dad just tried to give the older dog away to them. We are beyond furious by now, and when he storms back in with the dog, he demands to surrender the dog. We say fine, and we take the dog back and set him up in a kennel, and then entitled dad demands to adopt the puppy. We once again tell him no, and he freaks out demanding the older dog back while having a complete tantrum meltdown in our office. Because he didn't fill out the surrender paperwork, sadly, we had to give the older dog back because legally it was still his property. He storms back out of the office and they left with the older dog. It doesn't end there. The very next day, he came back with the older dog by himself and once again demands to surrender the dog. Now, it's because the dog apparently bit one of his kids in the face, and he rants about suing us, but we remind him that when he adopted the dog, it became his property and his responsibility. After we make sure he signs the dog over, he again demands the puppy. We tell him no again, and here's the big kicker. That morning, we got calls from his neighbors reporting him for leaving the dog locked in an outside cage overnight. The neighbor said that the dog rarely ever got to leave the cage, despite almost freezing temperatures that week. We informed the entitled dad that not only was he not getting the puppy, he wasn't getting the older dog back either, and now he and his family were on a do not adopt blacklist for the state, and wouldn't be adopting anything from anywhere from now on. He just sits there in silence and storms out of the office and ran to his car. I've never seen someone so hell-bent on getting out of here. Damn. Talk about not being able to make your mind up. You gave him all the information he needed, stating that the dog should not live with other dogs, just for him to come back the next day asking for a tiny puppy. He clearly has no idea of responsibility or how to look after a dog, so it definitely is for the best that you have blacklisted that family from adopting. If possible, I think you should reach out to other surrounding kennels and get them blacklisted there too, as it does not seem safe for a dog to be left with that entitled father. If you enjoyed these stories, be sure to subscribe and hit the bell. Check out the other videos on your screen right now. Otherwise, you're definitely the jerk.